few miles from Andrews Air Force Base, which has at least 3 squadrons of fighter jets on alert at all times to protect the nation's capital. Of course, part of the official story is that Andrews was not keeping any fighters on alert. But as I think I showed convincingly in my book, this story is completely implausible. The second reason the Pentagon is so well defended is that the U.S. military has the best radar systems in the world. One of its systems, it has bragged, does not miss anything occurring in North American airspace. This system is also said to be capable of monitoring a great number of airborne attack objects simultaneously, such as would be necessary in the case of a massive missile attack. Given that capability, the official story, according to which Flight 77 flew toward the Pentagon undetected for 40 minutes, is absurd. Any unauthorized airplane coming towards the Pentagon would have been detected and intercepted long before it got close. Third, the Pentagon is ringed by anti-missile batteries, which are programmed to destroy any aircraft entering the Pentagon's airspace, except for any aircraft with a U.S. military transponder that would radiate a friendly signal. If by some fluke Flight 77 had entered the Pentagon's airspace, it could have escaped being shot down only if officials in the Pentagon had deactivated the anti-aircraft system. So even if we accept the official story, according to which the Pentagon was hit by Flight 77 under the control of Al-Qaeda hijackers, we must conclude that the attack succeeded only because the Pentagon wanted it to succeed. But there are many reasons to reject the official story. First, the alleged pilot, Hani Hanjour, was widely known as a terrible pilot who could not possibly have flown the trajectory of the aircraft that hit the Pentagon. Second, this aircraft hit the Pentagon's west wing, which would have been the least likely spot for terrorists with any intelligence whatsoever, and these guys were supposed to be so bright, they out-tricked our whole Air Force defense system. They would not have chosen the West Wing. Why? Well, in the first place, as already indicated, to hit the West Wing, the aircraft had to go through execute a very complex maneuver, which even some experienced pilots would probably have trouble doing with that size of an airliner. Second, the West Wing was being renovated. So instead of having thousands of people in it who would have been killed, it only had a few hundred. And most of them were not military people, they were civilians working on the renovation. Thirdly, you would think the terrorists, if they hate America and they wanted to strike at the Pentagon, the symbol of American military strike, they would have wanted to kill as many of the top brass and Donald Rumsfeld himself. They're over in the East Wing, as far as you could be away from the West Wing. Finally, the West Wing had been, the renovation involved a great reinforcement. So the damage was much less to the West Wing than it would have been any other part of the building. Another problem with the official story is that the initial damage to the West Wing's facade was far too minimal to have been caused by the impact of a Boeing 757. Fourth, photographs and eyewitnesses in the immediate aftermath failed to provide unambiguous evidence of the remains of a Boeing 757. Fifth, there are videos that would show whether the aircraft that struck the Pentagon was, in fact, a Boeing 757. But the FBI confiscated these videos within minutes after the attacks, and now the authorities have refused to release them. Sixth, the fact that the aircraft was not shot down by the Pentagon's anti-aircraft defense system suggests that it belonged to the U.S. military. So, whether or not the Pentagon was hit by Flight 77, the evidence suggests it must have been an inside job. We can conclude the same thing about the attacks on the World Trade Center. Why? Because the collapses of the Twin Towers and Building Number 7 had to have been examples of controlled demolition, brought about by thousands of explosives placed throughout each of the buildings. No foreign terrorists could have obtained the kind of access to the buildings this would have required. One reason for concluding that the 3 buildings were brought down by explosive is the very fact that they did collapse. High-rise steel frame buildings have never, before or after 9/11, been caused to collapse by fire. Even when, as in the Philadelphia fire of 1999 and the Madrid fire of February of this year, the fires were much larger, much hotter, and much longer lasting than any of the fires in the World Trade Center. The second reason is the specific nature of the collapses, each feature of which points to explosives. For example, the buildings collapsed straight down and at virtually free fall speed, as in controlled demolitions. And then the rubble smoldered for months afterwards. With regard to the Twin Towers in particular, many people in the building said that they felt or heard explosions. Virtually all the concrete of these enormous structures was pulverized into very fine dust. Try this. Get a piece of concrete and drop it a little over 1,000 feet and see if it pulverizes into very fine dust. It won't happen. Much of this dust, along with steel and aluminum, was blown out horizontally from the buildings several hundred feet. Most of the steel beams and columns came down in sections about 30 feet long, conveniently ready to be loaded onto trucks. And pools of molten steel were found beneath the rubble. These and even more effects point to the existence of very powerful, precisely placed explosives. A third thing supporting the theory of controlled demolitions is evidence of a deliberate cover-up. If the building's steel columns and beams had indeed been broken by explosives, an examination of the steel would have revealed this fact. However, although it is normally a federal offense to remove anything from a crime scene, the steel was quickly loaded onto trucks and put on ships headed for Asia to be melted down. I will mention one more example of the cover-up. Insofar as there is an official story as to why the towers collapsed, it is the pancake theory, according to which the floors above the destruction caused by the airplanes collapsed on the floor below, and then those floors collapsed on the floor below that, and then it pancaked all the way down. Now, even if this theory were remotely plausible, can you imagine it pancaking at free fall speed? The other problem is what happened to the 47 massive steel columns that constituted the core of each of these twin towers. They were the weight-bearing structures of each tower. Those 47, even if the pancake theory were true, those 47 steel beams should have been sticking up at least several hundred feet into the air, just like the old phonographs, where sometimes the 78 records would collapse, but the spindle's still sticking up in the air. You should have had 47 spindles still sticking up in the air. Well, what did the 9/11 Commission report do about that problem? It avoided the problem incredibly by simply denying the existence of these columns, even though those columns, I'm not making this up. These columns were the unique feature of these towers when they were first built. So the Commission report, after saying falsely that most of the weight of each tower was borne by the steel columns in its exterior walls, this supposedly authoritative report said the interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. Such a desperate lie is a sure sign of a cover-up. In any case, when we look at all these features of the collapses, the idea that they could have been caused by the impact of the airplanes plus the resulting fires is ridiculous. This is even clearer with regard to building number 7, which wasn't hit by any airplane, and yet it came down about 5:30 that afternoon. Its collapse remains so impossible to explain, except as controlled demolition, that the 9/11 Commission report did not even mention it, as if the collapse of a 47-story building was not worthy of comment.